Today we're installing POL's blackout brake kit with 2-inch drop spindles on a 1970 Chevy Chevelle. We used and recommend the following tools and supplies. Break your lug nuts free, jack up your front end and support your frame on jack stands, and remove your wheels. Using a 1/2-inch wrench on top and a 9/16 on the bottom, remove the rod connecting your sway bar with the lower control arm. We are removing ours completely to upgrade to POL's high-performance sway bar. Click the link in our description for more on that. If you don't have a shock removal tool, use a 9/16 wrench and a pair of vice grips. Remove the nut, remove the bushing. At the bottom, use a 1/2-inch wrench to remove the 2 nuts and release your shock. Remove the cotter pin from the lower ball joint. Loosen the castle nut with a 7/8 wrench to give you room for your pickle fork, but leave the nut on so the lower control arm doesn't drop completely. Position your pickle fork between the control arm and the spindle. Jack the lower control arm up so the weight isn't resting on the castle nut. With the jack in place, remove the castle nut. Remove the 2 caliper bolts with a 15/16 Allen wrench.
Okay, remove both of those and then just slide your caliper right out.
Remove your grease cap.
Give it a little tap with the flathead screwdriver and twist it.
Remove the cotter pin. Use a crescent wrench to remove the nut and then remove the rotor. Remove the bolts that secure the caliper bracket and dust shield. The 2 on the bottom require 3/4 inch on both sides. Because we're also upgrading to POL's Stage 3 suspension kit with tubular control arms and coilovers, we'll be removing the spring.
Let your jack down slow. There's a lot of pressure that's built up.
Use extreme caution when removing the spring. It may be under tremendous pressure. You might have to give the lower control arm a kick to relieve the pressure.
Well, I used my foot to push it down just a little further, to release some of the pressure on that thing. You don't want to do it with your hand, because if you get in there and try to push it down with your hand, I heard the horror stories of those things coming flying out, knocking fenders off.
We're upgrading to POL's Stage 3 suspension, so we won't bother removing the spindle from the upper control arm. Removing the spindle from the upper ball joint is the same process as the lower. Cotter pin, loosen, pickle fork, remove. Using a 5/8 wrench, remove the banjo bolt connecting the brake line to the caliper. Use caution. Brake fluid is highly corrosive and will destroy your paint if given the chance.
Okay, this is your regular wrench, obviously, and that's your line wrench.
Normally, we'd use a line nut wrench and an 11/16 wrench to remove the rubber brake line from the frame. But after 50 years, we were having a hard time breaking it free, so we followed the line and disconnected the hard line from the proportioning valve. Then we removed the clip.
This clip right here holds the rubber line, everything into place. So we're gonna use our screwdriver and just pop that thing free.
Fished it all through.
Should be able to fish all this through, like so.
And moved over to our vise.
And then instead of trying to turn by that nut and rounding the corners off, I'm gonna turn by the rubber banjo fitting. So yeah, now that thing threads right off of there, and I didn't round the corners off of this, and I can go ahead and reuse that.
Now that you have your old brakes and spindle out, you can replace your spring, shock, and sway bar in the reverse order that they were removed.
Blacked out spindles, and these are black oxide. It's not powder coat, but black oxide. It'll still look this way, for years to come.
Place your new blackout 2-inch drop spindle on the lower ball joint and finger tighten the castle nut to hold it in place. Position your blackout caliper bracket and dust shield into place, and then finger tighten the top bolt.
But you'll notice that you've got 4 holes here. Okay, the top ones are just gonna go to mount your caliper bracket on there and the backing plate. These lower ones is where your steering arm down here is gonna connect to. Because these are drop spindles, it moves everything, moves this spindle shaft up.
Secure the bracket and shield with the 2 bolts on the bottom using a 3/4 inch on either side. Then use an 11/16 for the top. Bend in the tabs around the top bolt. We're upgrading to a new POL steering arm as well. Attach your new arms using the bottom 2 holes and 2 3/4 inch bolts. Jack up the lower arm to compress your spring and shock enough to send your upper ball joint through the spindle. Finger tighten the castle nut on your upper ball joint. Now you can lower your jack. For the bearings to fit around the spindle, you may have to sand down the oxide coating. Now you can reattach your steering arms to your outer tie rods. Use a 3/4 wrench to tighten the castle nut on your upper ball joint and insert, fold, and trim your cotter pin. Repeat the same process with a 15/16 wrench on the lower ball joint. Now it's time for you to pack your bearings. For more on this, watch our Barracuda front suspension rebuild video by clicking here. Drop your greased packed bearing into the rotor and add your seal evenly.
Basically to keep the bearing into place and keep the grease in there. This inner seal right here rides on our the spindle shank, and basically just keeps this thing packed with grease. Just gonna go ahead and throw a little bit of grease right here on these surfaces where the bearing is gonna ride.
Place your new blackout rotor on the spindle. Add your packed outer bearing, spindle washer, and spindle nut.
These don't require, really much force. You just wanna make sure that when you're rocking it back and forth like that there's no extra play in there, but you still want it to be able to spin. If you lock these things down too much, you're gonna end up smoking the bearings in there.
Line up your castle nut with the cotter pin hole. Insert your cotter pin and fold it back. Now it's time for your grease cap. Your grease cap must be applied evenly. Using a pipe around your grease cap and the side of your sledgehammer will help with even pressure.
It's very important that when you're gonna put these things on that you make sure that bleeder valve is always at the top.
Get your blackout caliper into place and finger tighten your caliper bolts. Tighten your caliper bolts with a 3/8 Allen. Make sure this is the side of your banjo bolt that you attach to your caliper. Set up your banjo bolt and crush washers just like this. Now tighten your banjo bolt to the caliper with a 7/16 wrench. Attach the other side of your line to the existing brake line. Replace the clip and tighten with a 3/8 line nut wrench on top and 11/16 wrench below. Now it's time to grease all your Zerk fittings and bleed your brakes. Put your wheels back on and enjoy the stopping power and style of your POL Blackout Brake Kit. Thank you for shopping with POL at performanceonline.com. Subscribe to our channel for more how-tos, featured customer rides, event coverage, and more. That's POL at performanceonline.com.